Yo, welcome back to the channel, guys. We are back with some Aether Gazer, and today we're gonna be talking about the warp system. I'm so glad I can finally talk about this system. Y'all just don't understand, because this is what officially got me hooked on Aether Gazer. The warp system not only adds a major power spike to all characters, but it also makes building your characters a lot more fun and flexible. So let's start out by taking a look at some of the upgrades you can actually add to your character. Then I'll explain some of the warp skills that you'd want to use for both your DPS and your supports. So this is going to be a more generalized video, and then we can get into more details at a later date. So with all that said, let's get straight into the video. To start things off, I'm going to explain how this system works. Once you actually try it out for yourself, it will make a lot more sense, but I'm going to try to explain it the best way I can. There's 6 cores, right? 6 cores for 6 sigils. Every core has 2 slots. 12 slots in total, right? Easy. Now, here's the weird part. We have 6 cores with 3 different pools of power-ups or warp skills. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look here. So these are all the warp skills available to us when we unlock this system. The only requirement to unlock this is to have level 40 sigils, okay? But take notice, we have 3 different pools of warp skills for every 2 cores that we have. So cores 1 and 2 share a pool, cores 3 and 4 share another pool, 5 and 6 has their own pool. So this means that you can't just have the same power-ups in every slot. You have to choose from whatever pool of it is. Now, every warp skill can be leveled 3 times, and remember we have 2 slots for every core. So you can stack 2 warp skills within the same pool on top of each other. So for example, you can stack range damage 2 times in the first and second core for a total of 12% range damage. This means 2 warp skills at max level is the most you can stack, because you can only use 1 warp skill for each slot within those 2 cores. I hope that makes sense, but trust me, it will make a lot more sense once you actually try it out for yourself. Alright, now that we know how the warp system works, let's talk about builds, because this is where you can get pretty creative with not only character builds, but also getting more into building as a team rather than just a character. But we'll stick with the basics in this video. I'll go ahead and say this: 75% of your characters are going to be built in a very similar way, okay? It's not going to be as complicated as it looks on paper, and once you get familiar with both your characters and the warp system, then it'll be a lot more easier to build them. Starting with the first 2 cores, for both your DPS and your supports, 90% of the time you will take melee and distance damage warp skills. This is pretty standard just because there's not really too much else to invest in. So for the most part, you're going to be taking these 2. And then you can choose either this warp skill, which increases damage dealt to enemies below 40% HP, or you can take the opposite, which increases damage dealt to enemies above 85% HP. Or you can take a mixture of both. Me personally, I usually take a mixture of both of these because it spreads out the damage increases pretty evenly. If your DPS has a very good skill 1, then you can consider a mixture of skill 1 cooldown. You can increase the level and damage of skill. I actually use the cooldown reduction on my Oceanus because his skill 1 is very important to his kit and you want to use his first skill as quickly as possible. So it really depends on the character. For your healers, there's increased healing effectiveness when below 40% HP, but I never really found this useful personally. Maybe if it was just a flat out healing effectiveness increase, it might be good, but that's not the case unfortunately, so your supports are better off focusing on other cores before you get to these, which we will get into now. Cores 3 and 4 can get a little more trickier and will heavily depend on how your playstyle is. For the meta players, you will want to go with the warp skill known as Enmity to CN players. Enmity is the highest damage scaling warp skill out of all the warp skills that works with the whole kit. So for the people who likes to see the big numbers, Enmity is where it's at. The only problem with Enmity is you have to be low HP in order to get the most out of it. So this is a conditional warp skill that depends on how much HP you have. And for that reason, I don't usually like using it on most characters personally. The other good choices for cores 3 and 4 is increasing damage proportional to remaining HP, which means the higher your HP is, the more damage you would do, which is still situational, but it's a little more reasonable than Enmity. You can also get Ultimate Charge here, so that is a great choice if you just want something that will be beneficial for all characters. This is very powerful for Osiris, as we all know that she wants to ult as soon as possible. If your character has easy access to damage over time, like burn or something, there is a warp skill that will be beneficial for them. And then for another unconditional damage increase, we have the warp skill that will increase damage when any 3rd tier Aether code is activated. There's also skill 2 cooldown and increased skill 2 levels, so those are good for Hera of course, or for any supports that might have a focus on skill 2. Hera is the only one that comes off the top of my head, but just keep that in mind. Cores 1 and 2 has buffs for your skill 1, Cores 3 and 4 has buffs for your skill 2, and then Cores 5 and 6 has buffs for your skill 3. So keep that in mind for any characters that might have a hard focus on a certain skill, you know what I'm saying? Alright, so last two cores, 5 and 6. I tend to have the hardest time choosing which warp skills I want for these two cores because there's a lot of good ones in here to choose from. My favorite one out of this bunch is obtaining combat resources when entering battle. This is very powerful for most characters, as you can imagine, especially for quick boss fights. It just adds a turbo boost to your character's rotations, which is always welcome. You can use this on anybody. We have a warp skill that increases damage during modified mode, and one that increases damage during zero time space, which can be very powerful with Hera comps. You can build around this, especially with an upcoming character such as Thor, so keep that one in mind. There's warp skills to buff your ultimate skills as well, so for support characters this is very good, whether it's decreasing the cooldown or increasing the level. And then you have your skill 3 buffs in here as well. A lot of DPS characters skill 3 are their most powerful skill, so this is one way to squeeze out some more damage for your DPS characters. There's more warp skills that can work with certain characters, but these are the most used ones that I've seen personally. Alright, that is a quick rundown of the warp system. From now on, when I talk about a specific character, I will mention what warp skills you might want to build for them, because it will honestly be a case-by-case situation. But this video will give you a general idea on which warp skills are good, so I hope it wasn't too confusing. Once you actually get your hands on it, then it will make a lot more sense. But that is all I have for you guys today. Any questions, feel free to ask down below as always. I hope y'all have a good day. It's your Pixelated homie. I will catch y'all in the next one.